pathologist, I really didn't see much of it because there's really nothing to biopsy. It's a clinical disease. Much like, actually there is stuff to biopsy in Parkinson's disease, but usually you do that when they're dead. It's horrible, yeah. A lot of these neuromuscular or genetic, what we call degenerative diseases are awful. We're actually going to talk about Huntington's here in a second. Punnett square, I'll do one of those for you so you know what I mean, and it might be useful for you on one of our exam questions. Let's not worry about penetrance, expressivity, bar bodies. Bar bodies. Did any of you learn that term in A&P? Bar bodies? Okay, you women, us guys are big fans. But your cells, your gametes, it's really, really cutthroat in the girl life. See, in boys, all of our gametes have an equal chance to, be the one to meet Miss Right after that long, arduous journey in that giant swim race. But all boy mature gametes, in a healthy male, have about the same opportunity to fertilize an egg. That's not how it goes down in the women. In female meiosis, after the first division, a supervisor comes into the room and looks at the two cells and says, "You're the pretty one, you're not, you die." And then leaves the room. And the pretty one is like, "Oh my God, I win, I'm so hot." And the other one's like, "Damn it." And then after the second division, the supervisor comes back into the room, sees the two cells, says, "You're the pretty one, you're not, you're out of here." And the pretty one, that's the egg that's going to be ovulated that month. She gets the dressing room, and she gets all gussied up, and she has a party in her honor. We'll talk about that later. Okay? But the other meiosis products are all discarded, like ugly ducklings. And in fact, in women who have two X chromosomes, the same thing happens to one of the X chromosomes in all of your cells. It's basically like, this town ain't big enough for two women, so one of us has got to go. And what a bar body is a degenerated, non-used X chromosome in female cells. You can actually sometimes see it microscopically. I mean, you ladies are all looking at me like, "That's right. Badass. Don't mess with us." It's actually kind of crazy sometimes. Although I will say this, I mentioned the chromosome poster downstairs. Most of you in A&P have told you this. But if you've never seen it, it's funny to look at if you ever get an opportunity, because it lists all of the functions for each chromosome that we know they do. You look at chromosome 1, there's this long list of stuff it does. And chromosome 2, all this stuff it does. For each chromosome, it gets to the X chromosome, and the X chromosome is about as busy a chromosome as we have. And the Y chromosome, it doesn't do anything. It has like two things. It's like a little space. Turn on boy parts and watch football, basically, is what the Y chromosome is. Bar bodies and mutations. I won't ask you specifically those terms. I think out of that list, locus, allele, the ploidy questions, and those that begin with H down at the bottom, homologous, homozygous, heterozygous. Those are the terms I really want you to emphasize as you study this stuff. Now we're in pathophys, so you all are probably expecting to talk about some diseases at some point. And by the mid-semester, that's pretty much all we're going to be talking about. But we kind of get into it lightly. And here are your first 5 diseases that we're going to learn. And I want you to know a little blurb about all of them, but I'm not going to force you to memorize every single word that's on these handouts. Let's start with the most common aneuploid disease. And in fact, I'm not so sure this isn't the most common. The problem is that there's sometimes a fine line between disease and condition or trait. But as far as genetic diseases go, Down syndrome is going to be right up there as one of the more common ones. It's certainly the most common aneuploid disorder. It's simply 3 chromosome 21s. Everything else is right. 2 1s, 2 2s, 2 3s, etc. Sex chromosomes, but when you got to chromosome 21, a third one was added. That means these patients have a total of 47 chromosomes. And I want you to remember 3 things about this disease. MR stands for mental retardation. That is still a term that we are allowed to use in a healthcare context. I probably should change it in my handout, but the reason I haven't is because I want to remind you all that when you're at a hospital and you go to a lecture over lunch to get some, I don't know, clinical credit or something, and they use the term mental retardation, if that's the context of the lecture, they're allowed to use that term. You hear somebody out on the streets call their spouse a retard, you have every right to tell that person, don't use that word around me or in public. You're not supposed to. You know, kind of like that ad they had about using the word gay, trying to get people to quit using that word as a negative connotation. The same with you know, retard is what people, I still hear people say it, and I comment. I say, I don't care if they're big muscle people either. I'm like, dude, you shouldn't use that word. And you know what? They don't do anything. They're embarrassed. Like, they're probably all like, yeah, and then they walk around. I actually have a severely mentally retarded cousin, and if you all have never seen severe mental retardation, then you know why. Once you see it, you know why you shouldn't use that term. My cousin is just a couple of years younger than me. She has never been able to walk or talk or go to the bathroom on her own. She's lived in a home her whole life, and my Aunt Janice visits her religiously. My Aunt Janice is getting on up there, 70 years old or something now. And I've even asked my parents what's going to happen to Gwen when Aunt Janice dies. Who's going to visit her? Who's going to make sure they're taking care of her and not letting her develop bed ulcers and things like that? Neglecting stuff. It's tough field to get into. Workers in that must really be cut out for it, because I know I would find that really, really depressing kind of work. But you know what? That's exactly the kind of field that the people who do go into it work cut out for it, and they love it. Because they go to work every day and say, these kids rely on me. I matter because these kids need, if I don't show up to work one day, these kids will not have as good a day as they would have if I was there. Same as in a burn unit. Geriatrics, believe it or not, is popular with a really small subset of people, but the people that go into it, they never get out of it because they're like, they need me. These old people need me. And great, because I'm going to be old someday. And I'm going to be needy. Trisomy X is the one I was trying to write on the board earlier. This is actually, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't finish. MR, remember mental retardation, remember risk for congenital heart disease, and remember risk for development of leukemia. In fact, for the mental retardation, the way you might want to do it on this, or for cognitive impairment, of all these, only one of them is not associated with it, and that's probably the question I would ask you about cognitive impairment or mental retardation. I'd give you these 5 diseases and say, which one is least likely to show this? And we'll get to that one in a second. Trisomy X is similar, except this one is 3X chromosomes, not 3 chromosome 21s. All, of course, are females, because there's no Y chromosome in the mix, and they all have 47 total chromosomes. This is typically associated with sterility and some level of cognitive impairment or mental retardation. There's a variability of severity too, by the way. You'll see kids with Down syndrome who have severe cognitive impairment, and you'll see kids with Down syndrome who can read and who can do basic math. So there's always you can't say this is what their IQ is going to be. You just can't. It's hard. It's got to be done clinically later. Turner syndrome. All of these are women. Here's some of the good questions for you to note here. Men, women, or both that get it. How many total chromosomes? What's the chromosomal abnormality? And then any other blurb I'm giving you with these. For Turner syndrome, it's only 1 X chromosome. So it's women, but they only got 1 X chromosome. So they have a total of 45 chromosomes. These patients never evolved to mental retardation. So this is the one they are sometimes mentally impaired. But in fact, in my day, the term MR, mental retardation, was IQ of 80 or less. And of course, there was severe, mild, moderate, or severe. It was like 85 or 80 was the cutoff. In Turner syndrome, you see a lot of 95 to 100 IQs. slightly less than the average, but not qualifying for retardation. So if I ask you which one of these is least associated with impairment, Turner syndrome. I won't ask you anything else about the clinical. If you all want to look at pictures, our book isn't great. It only has like one picture. But if you Google Turner syndrome images, and again, I would maybe get in the habit of that on some of these. Do an image search on some of the diseases we do in this class, because you get a visual image.
What does coarctation mean?
Coarctation of the aorta is this. Here's the heart, and here's a normal aorta coming off it. Okay? Here's a coarcted aorta. It narrows really tight there. So that causes high blood pressure behind that narrowing. That wasn't the best. I could probably have done it like, ooh, that's bad. That's what that means. Good question. Klinefelter syndrome is men who have an extra X chromosome. All their autosomes line up fine. They've got an X and a Y, but they also have an extra X. So they also have 47 chromosomes, typically have mental retardation or qualify for mental retardation. And for Turners and Klinefelters, I won't ask you specifics, but you might kind of gather a little bit of what their phenotype is. A female who has less X chromosome than she should might look a little less feminine than she should. Would that make sense? And a male who has a little more X chromosome than he should, would that male maybe look a little less masculine than you would expect? That's exactly what you find. Terms like gynecomastia, that means, what does that mean? Boy boobs, yeah, man boobs. Typically a student will either shout it out or hand signal it to me. What else here? Sterility, because they don't have spermatogenesis. Sparse body hair, small testes and genitalia. That's basically a less than manly man. I don't mean to sound mean, but that's really how I used to learn these diseases. What's the chromosome abnormalities? There's too many girl or too few girl hormones. That's what the phenotype dictates. Women with Turner syndrome tend to have a broader neck. They sometimes have a teensy bit of an Adam's apple. They don't have very well-defined breast tissue, and they oftentimes don't have their reproductive apparatus formed right, so that's why they're sterile. The last one here is cri du chat, which translates to cry of the cat. I don't really speak French. It's like cri du chat or something like. Anybody speak French? Okay, yeah, me neither. If there was a French person here, it would sound really cool when they said it, because their language is just kind of cool. Anyway, this is actually a partial deletion of chromosome 5, so technically not an aneuploid disorder, because remember, you've got to be off by 1 or some non-factor 23. This is just missing part of a chromosome, but this is probably the most severe condition that's on this little mini list. Low birth weight, mental retardation, microcephaly. Anybody know what that word means?
No brain or a little
It's
brain?
small head, small brain. Micro is small. Anencephaly is no brain.
That's what the Zika kids get, right?
Say again?
That's what the Zika kids get.
Yes. And which one is it? Drinking or smoking when pregnant? They cause opposite things. I think smoking can cause slight microcephaly. Drinking can cause macrocephaly. The head is too big or something. Yeah, but you'll see this in many, many conditions. And these kids don't do well. For cri du chat, I would just expect you to know that chromosome 5 and know that on this list it's one of the one that's associated with mental retardation. Okay? Yeah.
I was just curious, is there a reason why like certain chromosomes are more vulnerable to these sort of like errors than others, like 21 and 5?
No. All of them are equally vulnerable to this. The problem is that some are less likely to be born. Okay, so spontaneous miscarriages typically happen with a trisomy 17 or a trisomy 1, okay, a trisomy Y, okay, if that could even happen. These are the ones that actually make it to birth, so they are alive, and some of them live a lifetime. So that's why these are the ones that have diseases named after them. It's a really good question. You all will find, let's see, I have actually left a couple off. I think trisomy 18 is a condition you all may learn about. It's very, very severe, sometimes stillbirth, but sometimes they live into adulthood. So there are more than just this, the ones that I'm asking you to learn, but not all of them would be represented on this list of diseases. Okay, now let's talk about dominant recessive traits. And this gets a little bit confusing, so I think what we'll do is probably end our day with this. Probably the most challenging stuff in this unit is the end of page 3. What I would do is if after a lecture you feel like your head is spinning around like the little girl from the Exorcist movie, because there's just too much information and you're like, like that. Sorry, that scene really, I was like 5, that scene really freaked me out. Sort of spewing that stuff out. I was like, ew, shouldn't have snuck into this movie. Anyway, where am I? Read. My point was this. If you get lost, your book actually doesn't do too bad a job with these autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, and the X-linked diseases. I'll be pretty clear about what I want you to know, but it doesn't mean it'll totally all make sense. Autosomal dominant inheritance. This is following that rule I said before. Let's say it's chromosome 1, okay? Dominance would mean you only need one allele to get that trait like tallness. Recessive means you need to get it from both parents to have it. So this autosomal dominant inheritance is about dominant diseases. They are rare, okay? And the reason they're rare is because people who have autosomal dominant diseases have children at a way less rate. They rarely have kids. Men and women are affected equally. In fact, both these autosomal categories, men and women, affected equally. There are no skipped generations, and what that means is if you have an autosomal dominant disease, then either your parents or an aunt or uncle had it, and a grandparent had it, and great-grandparent had it. Basically what that means is if you look up your family tree, that pedigree I was trying to show you, at every level somebody's going to have a disease. It doesn't skip a generation. That's unique. The other two do.
Why is it rare that they have kids? Is it just the severity?
Because diseases are severe, yeah. Yeah, in fact, our representative disease we're going to get to, we talked about it, is Huntington disease. Now, this is very wordy. This third line is very wordy, and I want you to think about it. And I'll actually help you over there with the Punnett square here, or I can do it here. I'll just erase. Affected heterozygotes pass the trait on to half of their children. Affected heterozygotes. Now, that heterozygote means one chromosome has the disease gene and the other chromosome doesn't, because hetero means different alleles. So that basically means, let's say it's on chromosome 1, and that's the disease, and that's not the disease. If this is a dominant disease, this person has it, because all they need is one allele to get a dominant disease. Okay? If this person decides to have kids, when they make gametes, there's about a 50-50 chance that this chromosome 1 will be in that gamete. There's another 50-50 chance that this chromosome will be in that gamete. If this chromosome is in the gamete, the child doesn't get the disease. But if this one is, the child does get the disease. So let's read that sentence again. Affected heterozygotes pass the trait on to half their children. Okay?
And that's if the dominant gene doesn't come up and it's recessive and they won't, but if the
It has nothing to do with recessive. It's basically you got a 50-50 chance. In this person's gamete, either this chromosome 1 can be in that gamete or this chromosome 1. So it's 50-50. You're either going to get it or not. Okay? Now, if it's a recessive disease, does this person have the disease?
No.
They need both X's. But is there a 50-50 chance they could pass the gene on to their kids? Yeah, so that in effect, for recessive, we're talking about passing on the trait. In dominant, we're talking about passing on the disease.
But if it's like a male and he has a daughter and then he has passed on his ex, then he'll pass on the disease?
If this, first of all, this can be a boy or a girl. We're talking about chromosome 1. But no matter what, if this gamete gets this chromosome, then whether it's a boy or girl child that results from that, this is a dominant trait, that child will have the disease. Okay?
So does it stop? So if they don't pass the X to the child, does that mean the disease stops?
Well, it means
They
it stops
continue
in their
to carry
family
it.
tree.
Yeah, so they don't continue to carry it. Or...
Yep. I mean, they do, but they don't have kids, so the tree stops. Okay? I mean, they might have nieces and nephews.
But what if she's saying if they had a kid and it didn't have the X, so they had kids, they didn't have the X in it, they couldn't carry it on to their kids?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get, so that would be kind of like, let's say this is a dominant trait, okay? And the child got this, and normal from the other one, then absolutely, there is a chance the child will not have the disease, okay? But the deal is this, you got a 50-50 chance of getting the gene, thus a 50-50 chance of getting the disease. The math is a little different in autosomal recessive, okay? Now, one point here. Let's say this person had one child, okay? And the child got this chromosome. Do they have the disease? No, 0 is no disease. And that's the only child this person had. Now, for this family tree, if that was the only person that had the disease, is it gone? Because the child didn't get it, so can't pass. We're going to assume that the other parent didn't have the genetics. Okay? That still doesn't break our skipped generations rule. Okay? Because our skipped generations rule is this. If you have the disease, somebody at every level of your family tree had it. This child doesn't have the disease, so they don't qualify for that discussion. It's if you have the disease, your parents had it, your parents' generation had it, your grandparents' generation had it, your great-grandparents' generation. It's not like this child can go on through life without the disease and now have kids with the disease. This child doesn't have the genetic technology to pass it down. So I think your question was, can it be removed from the family tree? Yes. Example, and this is just our there's many examples of autosomal dominant diseases. Our representative example is going to be Huntington disease. I won't ask you to learn anything about, we're going to talk a little bit about it in the nervous system. But anytime we learn a disease and a chromosome, for the rest of the semester, I want you to know that. By the end of the semester, you all will have a list of about 12 diseases that I will expect you to be able to tell me what chromosome is affected. For Huntington disease, it's chromosome 4. Autosomal recessive inheritance. This is when the trait or the disease is recessive, so in order to get it, you need both. In this situation, this person doesn't have the disease, but they carry it. They could possibly pass on the genetic technology for that trait to their offspring, even though they don't have the disease. These are also, they tend to be rare, and it's for a little bit different reason here. It's because the way the math works out, the only way a child can have an autosomal recessive disease is if both parents are carriers. And for most autosomal recessive diseases, most of us don't carry them. Maybe 5% of the population is a carrier of recessive disease X. Well, what are the odds that somebody in that 5% is going to meet somebody else in that 5%? It's actually less than 1% chance that would happen, or actually it might be a 1.5% chance that two carriers would meet and have kids. So that's why they're rare. The math just doesn't catch up. By the way, I was going to mention this on Down syndrome. if a child has Down syndrome, what can you maybe say about that child's mother? This isn't a carrier thing. You can say that maybe her gamete had an extra 21 in it, or maybe that. But what clinical piece of information might you be able to say about a child with Down syndromes? Maybe, okay, let me take this from a different angle. Yeah, that's where I'm going with it. What women are counseled about Down syndrome before they get pregnant? Older women, okay. And what is it, like 36 and older or something like that? Okay, so answer me this question. Do most children with Down syndrome were they born to mothers over 35?
Not all of them.
I just said most.
Yeah.
Okay, and the answer is no. Not even close. Most, by far, most children with Down syndrome are born to mothers younger than the age of 35. Why? Because it is not wrong. Older women are more likely to have Down syndrome babies. Okay? For every 40-year-old female that has a child, how many 25-year-old women have a child? About 150. It's about 150 to 1 ratio. So even if you have a 10 times more chance at having a Down syndrome child by having a child when you're 40, there's 150 times more 25-year-olds having children. And that's why, despite that rule, most children that have Down syndrome, their mother was not 30 years old. Their mother was not above that age. I think, again, I said 30, but the age cutoff is 35. Most Down syndrome children are born to women younger than that age. Again, that's math messing with a scientific fact, because you're like, of course, they're all got older mothers, and it actually isn't that way at all.
Oh, with Down syndrome, it's not something that would be inherited because it's that specific gamete
Correct.
that's affected?
Correct. If a child with Down syndrome, that child, a mother that has it, it's complicated, but these are not heritable, like these autosomal recessive.
You couldn't get
dominant.
like genetic counseling.
Exactly. They can diagnose it in pregnancy, but it's not something that genetic counseling falls for. Consanguinity and skip generations are common in the recessive inheritance. Does anybody know what the word consanguinity means? Inbreeding. It's like when cousins, like brothers and sisters. It's naughty. You're not supposed to do it. Like, anybody see that movie Deliverance? I won't recommend it. West Virginia. Anyway, anybody from West Virginia? Don't worry, that movie was filmed in Georgia. They said it was in West Virginia, but it was in Georgia. Consanguinity is actually not as uncommon as you would think in really, really remote rural communities. The only people you ever interact with are distant cousins. And that, nature doesn't love that. By the way, I mentioned the elephants the other day, or any creature. Don't worry, I won't get off on it. Some of you know, don't get him on elephants. Because he won't shut up. I know, I'm already about to get all fired up about it, but I won't. How many of an organism do we need to get down to before we say they're extinct? Is it 0? Hint, it's not 0. Could the story as we describe Noah's Ark actually have happened? Because did we all read are you all familiar with the Noah's Ark? I'm not a religious person, but I'm not going to offend anybody who is, don't worry. The story of Noah's Ark, we all learned that the big flood was coming, so Noah built this gigantic ship and got 2 of everything, a boy giraffe and a girl giraffe, a boy elephant and a girl elephant, a boy chicken and a girl chicken. Anybody ever wonder how they kept the carnivores from all, anyway. And were bacteria on that ship? Because they said all life forms in my Bible. Anyway, I didn't ask. People at church told me to quit asking questions. How many? Does that make sense? No, it just... If I'm Noah and the floodwaters go away, and I dock my boat, and I've got a boy and a girl giraffe, and I say, go make a baby. Then what? That's it. There's no more giraffes. They're extinct. 2 is extinct. 200 extinct. Because there's not enough genetic material for them not to be having sex with their cousins and having babies. And eventually they're all going to be mutants, and that will go away. They say this, for a complex creature like humans, you have to have something like 1,200 or more. The silverback gorillas are a real issue in Africa right now because they're not sure how many are left. They're hoping there are 800 left in the wild. Because once that creature goes under 800, they're going to consider them extinct. That's really, really, really sad. Because they didn't need to be extinct. Some people just shoot them for target practice. A gorilla. Sick. But so, consanguinity isn't, necessarily, I'm going to go make a baby with my sister. It is, some communities are so isolated that the only options you have are people that may be distant cousins, and you may not even know that they're distant cousins. So the genes get all mixed up. Affected persons may have affected siblings, but they rarely have affected parents. That's because people with these diseases have children a lot less frequently than people who are carriers of these diseases. So when 2 carriers have children, there's a really good chance that one of their children has the disease. And they may have other children that have the disease, but it's not a guarantee, and we'll do the math for that here in a second. Offspring of carrier parents have a 25% chance of having the disease, and that's where the Punnett square comes in. Let's do one real quick, and I'll tell you what, let's just do a Punnett square with tallness. Let's not necessarily do a disease. The way you do a Punnett square is you put dad's alleles up there, and you put mom's alleles here on the side. You could have done dad on the side, mom up there. I'm having a hard time today. Good thing it's summer. Let's say we're talking about tallness, and here's what dad provides. 1 tall gene and 1 not tall gene. Here's what mom provides. 1 tall gene and 1 not tall gene. Now what a Punnett square does is it tells you all of the gene combinations that their kids could have. Like in this box, you would take the big T and the big T. So they could possibly have a child that got 2 tall genes. They could also have a child that has a big T and a little t, or a little t and a big T. These 2 are basically the same. Or you can have a child with 2 little t's. So basically, if what I can do with this is say, if tallness is a dominant trait, what percent of their kids are going to be tall? 75%. 1, 2, 3 of them have a big T, and for a dominant trait, that's all you need. What percent of their kids will not be tall? 25. So there's a 2x2 Punnett square for a dominant trait. Let's change the rules. Let's make tallness a recessive trait now. What percent of their kids have it? 25, because you need both. How many of their kids are carriers? 50% of their kids are carriers. And 25% of their kids didn't get the gene at all. And in fact, what this second to last line under autosomal recessive says is offspring of carrier parents have a 25% chance of having the disease. Both my parents are carriers if this is recessive, okay? And a 25% chance of having the disease would be this box. There's also a 25% chance that 2 carrier parents would have a child that not only doesn't have the disease, is not even a carrier of the disease. And this is where you can see skip generations coming in. Actually, this is where you see skip generations coming in. Because if these 2 have 2 kids, and there's one of them, and there's the other one, do either of their kids have the disease? No. They're both carriers, though. So could those kids have children with the disease? They could. So a generation could be skipped under autosomal recessive rules. Our flagship disease is cystic fibrosis. chromosome 7. It has to do with chloride channels, which of course are proteins. Well, any genetic disease, it's a messed up protein. That's what it is, because a genetic disease is a mutation where? On the DNA. And what is DNA? It's a recipe for proteins. All it is in cystic fibrosis is a chloride channel. And it messes up all the concentrations of your mucus. Sorry, that was mucus coming out. Didn't mean to, the hand signal was unnecessary. Mess those concentrations up, it gets all gummed up and plugged in your airway. The pancreas, don't even get me started on how it messes with the pancreas. It's a really, really potentially severe disease. I've actually seen kids in the pediatric unit with what are called chest thumpers or chest tappers. They strap this thing on them that just goes, and it's on the, all it's trying to do is jiggle the thick mucus loose so they can put this suction and try to suck it out. And I remember seeing big blocks of it was hard. It was almost like brie cheese coming out of there. It wasn't like liquidy mucus. Horrible, horrible. Anyway, for recessive cystic fibrosis of chromosome 7, let's just roll through the X-linked and then we'll call it a day. X-linked inheritance is way more common in men. And that's kind of because of that bar body story I told you. How women who have 2 X's in a cell, there's not room. This cell ain't big enough for 2 X chromosomes. Well, if one of those X chromosomes in your female cells is defective, that's the one that gets casted away. So if you inherited an X-linked recessive disease, the chromosome with that disease on it is cast away. We don't need you. We'll just use me. I'm the pretty X chromosome. That's kind of how it goes. But men, we don't have an option. We only got 1 X chromosome. The other sex chromosome in our cells is a Y. So whatever X chromosome we got to use. And if my mom gave me a defective X chromosome, I don't have the option to discard it and use my other one. That's why men are way, way more commonly affected by these than women. Never is transmitted father to son, because father to son is always a Y chromosome. I, by definition, got my Y chromosome from my dad. We know that because my mom didn't have a Y chromosome to give me. Skip generations are common. Affected fathers, meaning, and the word affected in this means has the disease, not just a carrier, but has the disease. Affected fathers will pass the gene on to all of their daughters, all of them, because if I was to have a daughter, I only have 1 X chromosome, and if it's defective, my daughter's getting it. And those daughters will then pass that gene on to half of their sons. Because the daughter also gets another X chromosome from mom. Supposedly that's a healthy one, so now there's a 50-50 shot that she passes it on to her son. Okay? Kind of confusing when we go generation to generation and count it up, but what I tried to do is keep it fairly commonsensical. Your book helps you hash these out. By the way, another just awful disease is our flagship for this, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Do you all remember you're all probably too young to remember that. Do they do those anymore? Telethons, like the Jerry Lewis telethon? Like it was over Labor Day. They do this like 2-day thing to raise money for muscular dystrophy. There's various kinds. This is a severe one. These kids die at a young age. They're basically in a wheelchair by the time they're 9 or younger. But I didn't put a chromosome by it because what chromosome are we talking about? X. Yeah, these are all X-linked diseases. So Duchenne muscular dystrophy is our representative X-linked. On this first exam, I'll probably just straight up give you one of these diseases and ask you, is it autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, or X-linked? So if you know those 3, there you're going to get a question. Look over that section. I know we kind of blasted through it here towards the end. I'll be happy. We have plenty of time. By the way, in case you all want to know how your schedule is looking, next Thursday, rather than get a sub, we're going to take the day off. So we'll meet tomorrow.